Hey everybody, this is Terry Mitchell with the Voice on Fire interview series. So for those of you that have probably been following along and have seen a few of my interviews of late, these are the interviews with intention. And behind the scenes, really, what I'm doing is interviewing people that have got a really fascinating story. They're life influencers, they're difference makers, change makers. They're even people that are action takers. They're out there doing something to make a difference, either locally in their own community or potentially around the globe. And the importance of all of that is to find inspiration in any of their messages and figure out just how do these people do what they do. And my guest today is Josh Pelland from Canada. He's going to be sharing a pretty fascinating story, and I'll probably ask a few interesting questions along the way, dig a little deeper and find out what it is that Josh is doing. So, hey Josh, I'd love to welcome you to Voice on Fire interviews. Thank you for joining me all the way from Canada.
Hey Terry, thank you so much for having me and for your audience for listening in.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what fascinated me when I was finding out a little bit more about you is that you're not just somebody who sat back, so to speak, and just took what happened in your world as complete defeat. You're somebody who's just absolutely changed the way you engage with your world. And I'd love for the listeners to understand exactly what it is we're talking about here. Josh, you had a pretty intense accident, and I believe you were in a fairly challenging situation. You were out rock climbing, I believe. So can we get into that part of the story first?
Yeah, right away. So I was a climber for quite a number of years, almost 16 years on and off.
Wow.
And pretty much 4 years ago, on June 12th, 2016, I had a fall. I went out for a day of climbing. It was pretty early season. I didn't have a climbing partner that day.
Okay.
So I was doing a style of climbing called rope soloing. That just meant that I was managing all the rope work alone. And I was just going up and down this band of cliffs, and ended up having a fall of 65 feet. And I ended up falling straight down. I landed on my shoulder and the back of my head hit a boulder.
Oh, wow.
I was still conscious and trying to sit up and trying to help. There were a few more climbers that ended up coming later on in the day that found me, that were helping me out. And I was airlifted to a hospital in Vancouver on the west coast of Canada. I was revived twice in the helicopter, and started undergoing quite intensive surgeries. And I was in intensive care for about 2 weeks. And I don't really remember the first month of being in hospital. I kind of drifted between kind of reality and horror, nightmares and this sort of stuff,
Yeah.
So I had no idea what was going on, but a lot of my senses were still there. So I could hear, sometimes see, smells, and everything was just very foreign to me. These smells, sights, and all this, and couldn't register what was going on within that time frame.
Okay. Wow. Just the story itself is quite frightening, because it reveals a lot of the what ifs in world, and in that sense, it creates that obvious vulnerability to realize that only takes one thing, and our world as we know it can be changed quite dramatically in the space of moments. What I'm fascinated to understand with regards to your story is you've obviously had a fairly active life, and there's quite a few fascinating things that you were participating in life in your earlier years. I believe you're involved in the military or the armed forces in some capacity.
Yeah, so in 2005, I left Canada and I went across to Great Britain, and I joined the Royal Marine Commandos.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up serving for 6 years. Served in a variety of different units, some of them being like special operations type units, serving in Afghanistan, one place, undergoing training all throughout the world, the jungles, the Arctic, all over,
Hmm.
doing a wide variety of different things.
Okay.
So,
What do you think that may have been in terms of significance, in terms of the way you've chosen your recovery? Was there perhaps lessons that you'd learned throughout that time that may have played a part in how you were able to follow the path of recovery that you've chosen?
yeah, I accepted what happened. I think I did anyways. I don't really actually remember having a cry over anything that happened. Maybe I did early on when I was quite off my face on drugs and stuff like that, you know. Um, but I think I accepted it quite quickly because situations that I'd been in before, where I experienced near death, hard situations. Um, I was ready to die, and as such, during those times. So I faced those realities as well as climbing. I did a wide variety of climbing, from ice climbing, sort of your traditional mountaineering, alpine stuff, as well as big rock climbing.
Mhm.
And I always accepted that as, hey, something could go seriously wrong here. So it was always in the back of my mind. Um, so kind of having that um, self-reflection, I guess you could say,
Mm.
always, I knew, okay, yeah, something go wrong, here I am, something did go wrong, let's shift focus into it. So that was one aspect. And then also being, I think, from my time in the military, being able to be pretty brutally honest with yourself,
Mm.
being brutally honest how you're feeling, but then also being able to kind of push those feelings to the side to get on with those jobs that you have to do. As
Mm.
cold as it is, you have to do that sometimes. Um, so I was able to do that and just kind of buckle down and settle myself into learning how to live
Mm.
in a completely new body. So I'm paralyzed from the chest down,
Okay.
complete sever of my spinal cord. So everything is brand new.
Wow.
I'm still learning a lot of things 4 years on. So it was a pretty big shock to the system
Oh,
right
yeah.
away.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, the only way that I can, in my own mind, think, gee, how do I relate to that? And really, is it even possible for me to relate to that? Look, I've had a car accident a couple of years ago, and to this, as it is now, I still have a little bit of difficulty walking in that I've lost some of the nerve sensation in my leg.
Hmm.
And the challenge that I found for me was, I myself have been a fairly athletic person. So for me to suddenly realize I can't walk, and just I'm still learning to walk. And I kind of find, in a way, for me, that's fairly amusing because I mean, obviously I do get that privilege. I can still reclaim the ability to walk. I just don't walk very well. And seeing
Hmm.
life from a new perspective and being able to acknowledge that, for me, the mind shift was, hey, I can still do things, I still have to be independent. So there's obviously a shift in mindset that we go through. Do you credit a lot of perhaps the things that you experienced in your early life? It sounds like they did play perhaps some part in not only just re-establishing this new acceptance in what your body can and can't do, but just in the fact that you haven't just settled for life in a wheelchair. You do stuff. I mean, I've checked your website out, and some of the things you do, it's I find it quite remarkable. And I'd love to know what started you on that journey towards the more athletic things that you do. So obviously, tell me a little bit more about the hand cycling, because I do know somebody myself that had been involved in that several years ago, and it's phenomenal effort that is required. I'd love to know, where did your mindset get to be able to look at involvement in that kind of sport?
So I wanted to get involved in sport right away. I knew a lot of guys that had been injured overseas, lost limbs, various injuries, and they transition into different sports. So that was in my mind straight away. But it really was the unselfishness of others that got me involved straight away, with people coming to visit me with various levels of spinal injuries, playing different sports, and taking their own time to introduce me to these sports and stuff. So hand cycling was pretty much the first one that I came across. Went out actually when I was in hospital, probably my 3rd month, and I started riding around. Met my first cycling coach there, and he introduced me to the sport more in depth. And I would go after my physiotherapy and rehab in the hospital and go and start training. So I'd go about 3 times a week and immerse myself in it. And that's one of the things I like to do now, is train full time and compete. And I'm just building myself up to get to as strong as I can, both physically and mentally, to be as competitive as possible.
Yeah. Again, the only way that I can relate to any of that myself and imagine that, what is it that takes somebody through those decisions to transition into something that that requires that level of commitment is down when I was going through some of my own rehab, is the rehabilitation gym down the road. They have one of those aqua cycle things with the hands. It's like this bowl of water, and you sort of pedal through. I loved it, really loved it, but it was like, give me 2 minutes of it and I'm done. And here you are.
Man.
And how far do you go?
Yeah, so we do time trials, so individual time trials, us against the clock. And that can be between 15 and 20 kilometers. And then road races can be 30 to 40K sort of type thing. And I've done some big endurance rides over 200 kilometers, kind of nonstop. But I think that as well just stems from my time in the military, the time in the mountains, kind of that mindset, that endurance. And I've always loved that. So
I think I'm a bit speechless. It's like, how long? Over 200. That is phenomenal effort. And I applaud you. I think that if you can turn your life around, and I don't tend to want to focus on the fact that you've suffered a horrific injury. I mean, it is what it is, but it's more just being for those people who don't know you, that to understand that, and if they want to understand a little bit more, toward the end of this we'll make all the references to your contact details. But if they wanted to go to your website and see the photos that you've posted regards your injury, and it's just being able to understand that sometimes we think we can give up and be defeated and not take on whatever it is that life can deliver to us. Like, there's no certainty in life in any way, shape or form. And just having that, even just the kernel of thought to even think about taking on that challenge, to then progress it to the point where, you're an athlete, without doubt. To be able to go to that level is impressive. But it's to get it to the point where people can relate to it and think, well, what could they do? How could they change their world around? Who's sitting on the couch watching this who's like, gee, what can I do? It's really about recognizing that there are no limits, except really the limits. Obviously, there are physical limits if there are circumstances within your body that have changed, but there's no real limits in your mind in terms of, you work with what you've got, but how far can you take that? Does that sort of resonate with where you're at?
Yeah, I think it's that perspective thing, that big perspective thing. I remember sitting in the hospital early on, and I was in the rehab ward, and I was seeing a lot of pain and depression around me, and rightly so. People with spinal injuries, brain injuries, and I was like, I know where this can go if I fall into this, and I did not want to be a part of that. So it was the perspective where I thought, hey, I still got use of my hands, my chest, shoulders, my mind is still good.
Mhm.
Let's see where we can take this. And all of us have that in us, no matter what, to take your mind, use it, and push yourself. And it's a muscle though, right?
Mm.
It has to be trained. So I had to step back and compose myself and figure out what I wanted to do, and then just take all that energy that I had from my life before, that I built like that muscle, and then just shift it into something new. I was scared, 100%, fearful, but many times I'd faced fear and adversity, and I recognized it. So, but
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that's really significant in all of this, is being able to recognize your emotions, and to accept that something like this is phenomenally challenging to the state of mind. And the only way that I can again relate to that is that when I originally had the surgery on my knee, it went wrong, and here we are 18 months later, and I had to learn to walk, because it wasn't just routine surgery. Things did go wrong, and it was challenging for me to wake up and realize my leg doesn't feel right. And that, coming from the athletic mindset that, hang on a minute, I was going to go training, this year, this was going to be the year I was going to go training, and that was at the time of the accident, and realizing I can barely even get around, and if it wasn't for the crutches, I don't know how I would have gotten around. But just being able to recognize that it's quite confronting to when your world changes in whatever capacity that is.
yeah,
And it has to come back to, what do we know about ourselves, and confronting those emotions. And look, if you've got to cry, absolutely cry. If you've got to be sad, absolutely be sad. It's not about suppressing or denying the reality, but it's not getting bogged down in it, as you say, and recognizing that it could easily turn out differently if we want to wallow in, call it self-pity if we have to. And it is easy to go there. And one of the things that went through my mind at the time of the accident is when I started to notice some muscle wastage in my leg. And you've probably experienced some of that yourself. And it's when you know the extent to which it can happen. In my case, I had to recognize, if I let that go, I will lose use of my leg completely. I had to keep pushing myself, and it wasn't easy. And with your situation, I'm fascinated to understand, what do you envision in the future in terms of, obviously athleticism is a powerful tool for you. I believe you've taken to the speaking circuit as well. What was the inspiration behind that, and how did that come about?
Yeah, someone just asked me to come and speak quite early on to a group of people. Didn't really think about speaking or doing any of it, and I just said, yeah, I'll come do it. Just kind of shot off the hip, whatever was on my mind at the time. It was well received, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. So it goes quite hand in hand with cycling now, training full time, and being able to speak when I can. So I speak to a wide variety of audiences, or have, and different organizations, and I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed interacting with people afterwards. That's been it. That's one aspect that I've really enjoyed, being able to chit chat afterwards and that sort of thing. Yeah,
excellent. And I'm wondering whether you've had any involvement in all, or if there's been any interest in it, with Prince Harry's Invictus Games. Has there been any sort of indications that perhaps you might participate in that in any way?
No, I'm pretty hooked up with Cycling Canada at the moment as a development athlete. So all my focus is on there. But yeah, that Invictus Games, what they're doing there is pretty incredible. But no, I'm kind of just sticking in my lane, as it were, direction with the goals that I have.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of future development then, if speaking's part of what you're doing, and also with the development within the cycling area, I believe, if I've read your website correctly or read some of the information online about you, there may be a book in the makings.
Yes, I'm currently writing a book.
Mm-hmm.
Got an editor, which is definitely needed.
Yep.
So I'm working my way through that,
Yep.
sort of, and I have an idea for a second one as well already.
Oh, cool.
But kind of my biography. Would it be a biography? I don't even know. Yeah, sort of my story and all that sort of stuff.
Cool, excellent. And how far into the
Yeah.
book are you at the moment?
I'm probably a couple chapters towards the end.
Oh, wow.
Kind of, I guess where my kind of climbing career, as it were, kind of takes off.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of transitioning out of after the military, went into the private security world for a couple of years,
Okay.
and I'm kind of finished with that, and then transitioning to moving back home to Canada and starting up my climbing
Excellent,
type thing.
excellent. So is there possibilities that maybe we may see a movie based on the story of your life? Is there a chance you might go down that way?
Yeah, if anybody wants to make a movie about me, let's do it.
Let's do it indeed, absolutely. So from a perspective of where you're at, so you're in Canada, and it's obviously, I imagine, like, I speak to a few people around the world, and in my mind, having not been there, I imagine Canada can get pretty cold. So what do you do? Is there, like a different way that you participate in your sports during the winter weather? How do you find that the weather's affecting the quality of your health?
Yeah, well, I train indoors on a stationary bike trainer.
Okay.
So I just throw my bike onto a trainer and just stare at the wall for 3 hours a day or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And pound away. So I'm usually crawling up the walls.
Yeah.
By the end of winter.
Yeah.
And waiting to get out on the roads again.
Yeah.
But it usually gets broken up. I'll go down to the States. I've gone the last 2 years for a training camp for about 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
Down in Tucson, Arizona, which is great. And then in Western Canada, it usually warms up quite quickly around April time, and we'll head out there and go for a training camp as well. Mm-hmm. So that kind of keeps me busy, active during the winter. But it really is cold and hard to push a wheelchair around in the snow. So it's a little bit more indoors for me. Yeah. Where, I used to live in a truck for a number of years so I could travel around and go climbing as much as possible. Yeah. And that included wintertime. So I could ice climb a lot.
Okay.
As much as possible. So yeah, my winter activities have slowed down quite a bit.
Yeah.
But that's all right.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and it's again, it comes down to adapting to the situation. It's like, what do you do when circumstances perhaps have changed somewhat, and we need to be more adaptive to what's going on around us. And it's fascinating to hear the way that you process things and the way you're actually looking at the world, going, okay, well, if this is the case, then that's what we do, and if this isn't the case, we'll go and do that. So I'm finding that you've certainly come across with with that sense of a very adaptive mindset, which is really, really empowering. And I find that just being able to recognise that, okay, these are the circumstances, these are the limitations, this is what we do. I'm fascinated to understand perhaps a little more about what's your normal routine from a point of view of your training. What does training look like for you on a regular training day?
Yeah, so it varies all depending on where I am in the sort of season and that sort of thing. Probably on the bike maybe 5 times a week, 4 or 5 times a week, with a couple strength training sessions in there. And I can be from anywhere from 2 hours to 3.5 hours on the bike. It's usually 2 3-hour sessions a week. Mm-hmm. And then the rest will be 2 hours of various circuits and different things like that. Wow. So it takes a long long time, and it's a lot of admin, getting on the bike, getting off of it. Showering takes a lot longer, prepping, all this. So it is a full-time thing.
And if I may, by all means, please feel if it's not
No, go for it.
I just for the listeners' value, I imagine you have like a carer or somebody that has to be there with you in some instances, or what level of independence have you been able to achieve?
I'm pretty much fully dependent. Yeah. My wife helps me with quite a lot, sort of thing. Try not to take advantage of her, but I got long arms as well, so sometimes trying to get stuff off a grocery store shelf is quite a pain in the backside. But no, it just takes a lot longer, showering. But I mean, I just had to. It took twice as long before, early on, but it was just that sticking to it and trying to get my strength up and get going. Because I mean, I could have just ended up laying in bed forever, and then it would have probably been like 2-3 years later, and I'd been like, oh, now I've got to actually do something, So just got to get after it.
From what I'm gathering, you didn't allow any time lapse. You've pretty much, I mean, obviously medically speaking, they don't allow for much rest anyway. I mean, as soon as they can get you into any sort of movement-based rehabilitation, they're certainly going to focus on that. And how committed you become to that process is a little bit of, do you give up or do you fight on? And you've clearly got there's no give up in this situation, because in order to get to where you are in the time frame that you've achieved it, there's a lot of determination goes into that. And again, it can only be applauded that you have seen there are options here. It's like, I could give up, and if I give up, I'm going to be bedbound and completely dependent upon absolutely everyone just to do anything in my world. Or let me find out and explore, what does this new body of mine do and how much can I do with it? And maybe one day I might be able to achieve doing that for myself. And that sort of mindset, it's an empowering mindset. And I think if anyone's listening to this at some point, gets to this part of the conversation, it's just that inspiration to remember that, honestly, giving up really is not an option. And it's not until you fight through the fear and the frustrations and the anger and all the negative emotions are going to come up. They're there. That's what happens. But once you acknowledge them and not give them an enormous amount of power, just acknowledge them, allow them to be there, you get to that point where it's like, well, hang on a minute, what if I did just try this? And set yourself a little goal. And I think the goal setting mindset, would you say that you have a goal setting mindset? Is that something that obviously from previous experiences in your world you've adapted and put into work?
Yeah, definitely goal setting. Kind of pick a vision and just go for it. And no matter what happens, just keep going. So that kind of like key word that you said there, though, was determination, And I always say it's that recognizing fear, yet still choosing to move forward. And then the determination, or recognizing the fear, but having that goal, and just no matter what, relentless pursuit of it. I'm going there. Definite key.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. I think that's really, really critical. So if we were to wrap up with the key questions that I love to ask, in terms of where you're at and who Josh is in the scheme of things, my 3 key questions typically are, what is it you do? Why do you do it? And who do you do it for? And just from that point of view, is who is Josh in the world? So share me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm an ever-evolving character, striving to keep pushing forward and bettering myself, both physically and mentally, and most of the time very stubbornly. But so I guess that's who I am.
And what is it you do in the world? And obviously there's a whole range of things that you're active in. As an inspiration and as somebody who's making a difference, going down that pathway of being a speaker, obviously the fact that someone's approached you and said, hey, come and speak, taking that on and enjoying it, what's the mission there?
The mission is to encourage others that they can push through and push beyond their perceived limitations. And I'm no different than anyone. And everyone can do it. Whatever that challenge may be, whether it's something as abrupt that has happened to me and life-changing as me, that has happened to me, or just the day-to-day grind type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just through an encouraging, motivational, inspirational type story, as it were.
Yeah, oh, it's definitely that. It's definitely that. And who do you see as the primary audience that you really want to influence?
Primary audience would be just a wide range of different organizations, but I also do get quite a lot of satisfaction from talking to youth as well.
Okay.
Especially have spoken on mental health and kind of breaking those barriers or stigma, especially to youth. So that's been, sorry.
I was going to say, yeah, what was the motivation behind being involved with youth? How did that come about?
Well, it's just one of the kind of audiences that happened to come to me and say, hey, can you come speak? And I said, yeah, sure. And I've done it a few times and I've enjoyed it.
What sort of outcomes have you had? Have you had any of the students come up to speak with you, or have you found out later that something that you've said has changed someone's world? How was it unfolded?
Yeah, so having students come up to me and say, you've basically said everything that I've been feeling, sort of thing, type. That's been like kind of hit me, you know, or I've taken something away that I can apply, sort of thing. Thanks for that. So it's like, wow, that's pretty cool, pretty meaningful. Yeah. So I'm quite grateful to have those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a gift in being somebody who can put into words what someone else is feeling, or to give voice to somebody who may not know how or not feel comfortable expressing what's really going on inside. And I kind of use my key word when I think of that is normalizing the experience. And a lot of the time, a lot of people don't feel that they're normal. They don't, you know, I'm not like everybody else. There's something different about me. And when they can relate to something that somebody has said, even if that person is not like them so much, but can recognize the feelings that are there, and it helps to normalize the feelings. And that just gives so much power to help someone just start off on their journey of some sort of self-discovery. And you know, there could be someone's life that you could save, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they were going to perhaps end their life, but just someone who might not have been feeling that life was a positive experience, and you may have just given them that sense of hope. And I don't know about you, but I find that really moves me. That's something that is what drives me to do what I do. And just knowing that it only takes one person, and you know, whether that be you or me, or you know, the people that we know, it just takes one person to say or do that thing that encourages and inspires somebody else, and just to give them the hand up and remind them that it's okay, we can get there, and better off if we can do it together. And you know, that whole sense of community, which is partly what drives, you know, the Voice on Fire, is throughout reaching out to the global community. And what's really cool about this is that you're in Canada, and I'm down here in Melbourne, Australia, so it's just knowing that the internet, of all places, has given us that sense of connection globally, and you just never know where your message could be heard by somebody who's able to take something really valuable from what it is that you've shared. And it's really it's a powerful feeling to have. So yeah, it's cool that you've got that feedback.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it keeps going, and hopefully it does.
Yeah, excellent. And when do you foresee the book coming out?
Oh, I have no idea. No idea. Probably a little while.
Yeah,
Longer
this year,
now.
do you think?
Probably next year.
Next year, cool.
Probably,
all right, well, that's something
next
to
year.
look forward to. That'll be really cool. And then you can start the second one.
That's it.
Excellent. So is there anything you wanted to share about part of your story that you'd like the listeners to know?
Maybe I'll just leave everyone with, that you have that courage in you, that ability to recognize fear and still push forward. You need to be determined in everything that you do. And when it all goes wrong, just smile and laugh about it. And keep pushing on. Don't take it too serious, sort of thing.
Yep, excellent. So if people wanted to find you and connect with you online, where would they primarily start looking for you? I believe you've got a website, so would you like to share just a few of those details now?
Yeah, so it's joshuapelland.com. You can go there. You can find my Instagram links, my LinkedIn, and those are the two primary places where I am.
Okay,
awesome. And totally happy for people to reach out, get in touch with me, shoot me a message, ask me a question. Yep. Pretty open that way.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and I think that's really, really critical, as well as the more we are comfortable with the challenges that we're facing and the more open we are to discuss them, it takes away a lot of that emotional discomfort and some of that sense of taboo that, we have in Australia a TV program that's called, and I'm not sure if it airs anywhere else in terms of a similar network, called You Can't Ask That. And the basis of the TV show is that every week, or however often it airs, they bring people in that are part of I guess you could say, a minority. And they're people that have gone through something or experienced something or born with something, or, they identify as something. And typically they're from that taboo group where it's like, you don't ask people those questions, you just don't ask them. Whereas that's what the whole basis of the show is. You do ask them, and people send in their questions, and you have two people typically sitting on stools in front of the camera, and they swap them around as they go through the show. And they pick out a question and they read the question, and it's just straight up what their reaction is when they read the question, and then they answer the question. And it's so endearing, it's hilarious, it's sad. Yeah. It's just a real insight into what if we did just allow ourselves to ask those questions, and what if when asking, people were actually felt comfortable to answer them. How have you found that sort of effect for you?
Yeah, I've not been too bothered, kind of thing, and I'm usually just shooting off at the mouth anyway. And kind of being in the military as well, nothing's off the table.
Yeah,
sort of. So being able to hear and say anything and being comfortable, as well as being able to put forward any ideas, say going forward on an operation or something like that, being able to be in an environment where that is also encouraged. It's been pretty cool to be part of that.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, my background's in psychiatric nursing, and there you don't not ask questions. For example, one of the questions that I was encouraged to ask at all times was to ask if someone was going to end their life, because you're actually dealing with some fairly intense situations. And I just found it was a natural question to want to ask, because I found myself really concerned for someone's well-being. And once you get to that point where you realise you can ask the most awkward questions, or questions that you know may not be okay for people to typically answer, but you learn how to ask the questions, you learn how to answer them. And it's one of those things. Communication is such a valuable tool, and you know, I've really appreciated with these Voice on Fire interviews having the chance to speak with some amazing people, and I thank you for your time. It's been a really insightful and you know, really enjoyable conversation. I look forward to sharing this now. I'll be uploading this to my YouTube channel and to the podcast. So for anybody who's going to be watching this, you'll be able to tune in and watch this particular interview. And as Josh has indicated, you'll be able to capture his information, such as his website and how to find him, and reach out to him and have a chat to him if he's available. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to engage with you and share more of his story. So Josh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join me on Voice on Fire.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everybody listening.
Fantastic. So thank you so much. And to the next interview, I'll let everybody know when that will be uploaded. All right. Have a great afternoon, Josh.
Hey, cheers. Bye.